Hi, and welcome to the second orientation video where I'm going to talk through my grading system, which is called standards-based grading. And it's quite a bit different than what you're likely used to from math classes. Just to kind of set the stage here, you're probably um, going to have experience in the past with coming and taking a test in a math class, and let's say the test is out of 100 points, and so you go through the problems after you've done the test and you can see places where you've lost points. And at the end, at the top, you look and see that maybe you got a score at the top that says something like 79 out of 100. So you got a 79%. And that tells you, I guess I got like a C plus or B minus somewhere in there. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't really give you information about how did you really do on different topics. What's your level of understanding of the specific topics that exam was over? And so standards-based grading is an attempt to be more precise about the feedback that I give you. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to take you through a couple of documents to show what standards-based grading is all about. So first place we'll look here is we'll go to important links and documents and open up rubrics. So rather than giving you just a number at the top of any test that I give you, what I'm going to do instead is break each assessment. I'm going to call them assessments, but when I say that, I'm just talking about tests or exams. I'm going to break each one into the different standards that it covers. And remember, I use the word standard um, as synonymous with the word topic. So for each standard that's on an assessment, I am going to assign a level of mastery to you, one of 5 levels of mastery. I'm either going to say that you're an expert at that standard, I'm going to say you're proficient at that standard, developing, a novice, or not yet. So you're going to get one of those 5. Just for shorthand, you'll often see me write the numbers 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 to stand for those, um, but it's not a score of 4. It's just me saying you're an expert at that particular standard. Now, what I've done in this document is each standard I explain carefully what it looks like to be an expert and proficient and so on in each of the standards that we're looking at. So standard 1, standard 2, standard 3, they all have different descriptions of what it looks like to be an expert or proficient or any of the other levels of mastery. But what I will do for a moment is just kind of give you an idea of generally what do I mean when I say expert and proficient. And so this is just kind of a general rubric. So if you're an expert, it says that the ability to accurately address the most complex and advanced problems within an objective has been demonstrated, right? So no matter what I throw at you, even if they're really more challenging questions where you got to put a lot of ideas together, you're able to complete those problems successfully. If you're proficient, it says that the ability to apply concepts appropriately and with accuracy to address standard problems has been demonstrated. On the most complex problems, there is a flaw in either the synthesizing of the many strategies required or in the execution of some complex task. In other words, all of the bread and butter problems in that standard, you can do no problem. And you make a ton of progress on even the more complicated ones, but you might make a couple mistakes on the more complex ones. If you're developing, factual information about a topic is demonstrated fully or almost fully. Appropriate methodology is used to solve basic problems, although minor flaws in the execution are present. On more complex problems, an ability to connect the concept or standard with previous topics or to use many steps to solve a problem has not been demonstrated. So you're definitely showing me that you have some understanding of this topic, of this standard. You can do some basic questions, and then you make progress on um, more standard type questions. But maybe you struggle with the more difficult ones, don't really make much progress on those. And the mistakes that you make on some of the other problems are definitely more than just like little tiny errors, right? Like dropping a negative sign. All right, if you're a novice, it says a basic understanding of the objective has been demonstrated. Evidence is typically limited to recalling factual information about some but not all aspects of the topic. And there is either no ability demonstrated to apply the concept appropriately to problems, or there is some fundamental flaw in the execution of that application. So you're definitely demonstrating some knowledge of the topic, but you're not really making too much progress on the problems that you're working on. And then finally, not yet just means you really haven't put anything down, or the things you've put down aren't really relevant to the types of problems that we're doing in that standard. And like I said, this is just kind of in general, but then you can get real specific in every single standard about what it means to be at each level of mastery in those. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do is when you take an assessment, I'm assigning you level of mastery in each of the standards, each of the topics that appear on that assessment. All right, so leaving that document behind for a moment, let's go down, and your first assessment is going to be on standards 1 through 5. Okay. We talked about this in the first video, that you need to come to a proctored testing environment to take these assessments. And when you take that assessment, I'll go and I'll collect all the assessments from the test proctor. I'll grade them. But when I grade them, there's going to be no score at the top. There's just going to be throughout the assessment, I'm going to have each question labeled as to which standard it's covering. And next to the questions for each standard, you'll see me put down a level of mastery, right? A 4 for expert, 3 for proficient, 2 for developing, 1 for novice, and 0 for not yet. And so you get 5 different scores on that first assessment. Now, to help you get ready to take that assessment, this assignment here called the Standards 1 through 5 Assessment Preparation Assignment is going to be really helpful. So just like in those written assignments I talked about in the first video, you click on this document. And so what you see here is, for starters, a whole bunch of practice problems, all right, labeled by what standard they're covering. After you complete those practice problems, I then want you to grade yourself in the second part. And so you're, for each standard, decide, are you at an expert, proficient, developing, novice, or not yet? So to remind you of how to get each of those levels of mastery, I've put the rubric for standard 1 here, and then I've put my solutions to standard 1, my detailed solutions. So you can compare these to what you did above. And again, just like on written assignments, the problems up at the top that you're starting out by doing, you just do those on notebook paper, right? And keep the notebook paper. And after you finish, you're going to take pictures of all of it and attach them just like you do with written assignments. But then you go through, look at all the solutions and grade yourself. And so what this is going to do is this is going to identify for you the areas where you need more work. And then just as importantly, identify the areas where you're already pretty good. So if you are able to say that you're an expert or proficient at something, then you probably don't need a ton more studying in that area. But for topics that you do need more work on, where you have to give yourself developing or novice, then that's when you go and dig further into, redoing Newton assignments, going and doing those as practice problems, going back to the notes, and things like that. So this is this assessment preparation assignment. Again, you'll attach all the pictures of all your work here to get credit, but that's going to go a long way in helping you prepare for your assessment. Now, aside from trying to bring more clarity to the scores that you get, the other thing that standards-based grading is built on is the ability to improve. So whenever you take an assessment, there will later in the quarter be an opportunity for you to reassess on standards where you want your score to improve. Okay, let me go to the calendar to kind of talk this through a little bit. So we're going to have our first assessment on Thursday, January 22nd. That's over standards 1 through 5. You're then going to move on, and let me go to February here. And on February 4th, you're going to take an assessment on standards 6 through 10. Then on the 11th of February, it says standards 1 through 10 reassessment. So what's going to happen on that day is you're going to come in just like you did for the first assessments. You go to the proctored testing center, but you're only going to reassess on standards where you want to improve your score. So let's just say, for example, that you did great on standards 1 through 7, just to keep it simple. You did great on those, you got good scores, you're happy with them. But on standards 8, 9, and 10, you're not as happy with your score. On the 11th of February, you come in and you do standards 8, 9, and 10. You basically do a new assessment on those. And if you do better, I will replace your old score with your new score. So reassessing can really get you a long way because it's like the first assessment never happened. What's important to understand is that, of course, it's very much in your interest to do as well as you possibly can on the initial assessments, because you're going to have to juggle studying for the reassessment along with learning new material. So the less of that you have to do, the better. But the idea is, in standards-based grading, it's really important, and this is just part of my approach, right? Believing the growth mindset is that you should be able to use even scores that you're not happy with on an assessment. That should be part of the learning process too. So I don't want that to be the end of the story if you don't do as well on an assessment as you want. Use that to learn and then go ahead and improve. Like I said, I replaced the old score with the new, better one. And kind of the analogy there is like, many people don't pass their driving test the first time. So if you don't pass it the first time and you have to go back and study and work at it, when you come back and take it again and pass it, you still get the same license as everybody else, right? So I'm not as interested in when you learn it. I'm just interested that you learn it. Let's go back here. Okay, so that's how I'm assigning scores. How does that factor into a letter grade? Because at the end of the day, I do have to assign you an A, a B, a C, a D. I got to assign you a letter grade, right? So let's go back to the syllabus. I'll warn you now that this is not the most user-friendly way to approach your grade, but I'm going to start with this. Excuse me. On the third page of the syllabus, there's this big table. And this is how I can determine the letter grade. So basically, I count up how many experts do you have, how many proficients, how many developing, novice or not yet, how many of those do you have? And then based upon that, that's your letter grade. So for example, as long as you have at least 15 expert and proficients and less than or equal to 4 novices and 0 not yets, if that's the case, then you'll get at least a C. And you can climb that ladder by and get better grades by having, meeting the criteria in those ones. Now, the problem with this table is that it's not easy to read, first of all. And then second of all, it is it's not really useful to the very end of the quarter. All right. So you probably would like ways to kind of be checking on your grade as you go. So in order to help you do that, what I'm going to suggest is that you use the grade projector. That's right down here in important links and documents. And so what it allows you to do is type in the scores that you have after each type of assessment. And then what it'll do is it'll say, okay, if you continue on at this pace, this is what you're kind of on pace to get, right? So this person here, after assessing on the first 10 standards, is on pace for an A minus, okay? But you just got to be careful. Like if I put a 1 in here, see how big of a difference just that changing that 1 is. Change it to a C. And the reason for that is this is taking these first 10 standards and saying, okay, if you continued on at this pace, here's what would happen. Well, we expect you're going to end up with 3 novices. Okay, well, that's may not happen. And you may reassess on that standard and bring it all the way up to a 4, right? So, so just be careful, especially when you use it at the beginning. It's more volatile. I'm going to come back to this and remind you about how to use this as we start to get more scores under our belt. But this is going to be an easier way to kind of check on your progress. And just to be really clear about something that I might have been a little opaque about, you should, there'll basically be, for every assessment, there will be a reassessment opportunity, but just one. So just be aware of that. So it's important that if there's something you didn't score well on the first assessment, it's important that you get that corrected for the reassessment. All right, so 2 questions you might have at this point. One is there a final exam? And the second is, how does homework factor into the grade? Let me start with that second one. How does homework factor in? So homework does matter for your grade in kind of a strange way, but it does. So if I scroll to the very bottom here, standard 27 is the homework completion standard. And so if you complete 90 to 100% of your homework, then you get basically a free expert. You get a 4. 80 to 90, you get a 3 or a proficient. So basically, it should be, as long as you do your homework, it should be just kind of a free boost to your overall grade. So that's how homework factors in. As far as final exam goes, yes, you do have a final exam. So the way that works is it's very much a traditional final exam in that I'm going to put some topics on the final, but not others, right? And you won't know what they are. So let me kind of give you some examples here. So let's say that on standard 1, going into the final, you had a 2, which stands for developing. And let's say on the final exam, you get a 4, of course, which stands for expert. If that happens, then your overall level of mastery, it works just like a reassessment. I am going to give you that higher score that you earned on the final. It doesn't matter what it was before. So now you're at a 4. You're at an expert level for that standard. So good deal there, right? If you have, say, a 3, and I do not ask about that topic, which will happen for plenty of the topics, then you have the same score you had prior to the final exam. Let's say you had a 4, did really well before, but maybe you didn't study that topic quite hard enough, and then on the final you got a 2 or a developing. This is going to be the one time during the quarter where I will average the 2 scores. So of course, average 4 and 2, and you get 3. So that means you average out to a proficient. So that's going to be your overall level of mastery. And then kind of a stranger situation, but this will happen for some folks. Let's say you had a 3 going into the final. And then on the final, you got a 2. Of course, those average out to 2.5. So what does that mean? Well, it just means you get half of a proficient, half of a 3, and half of a 2, which is developing, when I am tallying up how many of each you have, right? So the final exam can really help you out, right? Standard 1 here is a good example of that. It can bring your grade down, so it's important to study hard for it. But a lot of times what happens with students is, I understand finals are difficult. As long as they study hard, yeah, this might happen to them sometimes, but you know what? This often also happens to them. And so sometimes you have some movement both ways, but it can really be a way to really improve your grade at the end of the quarter to quite a great extent. So that's just a quick rundown of my grading system. Again, I call this standards-based grading. Once students get used to it, they usually do like it. I mean, the reassessment opportunities are usually a real positive thing for students. So, but it does take some getting used to, and you may have questions about it. So please do reach out with any questions. I will be reminding you of things, especially as we get closer to that first assessment and how the grading is going to work. So this won't be the last you'll hear from me on it. But please do feel free in the meantime to reach out with any questions that do occur to you.